December 18, 2025, was a day that would draw attention across Florida and beyond. The state was set to carry out its 19th execution of the year, a number that highlighted both the intensity of its justice system and the decades-long path of one man, Frank Athen Walls. Convicted of multiple murders in the late 1980s, Walls' case had captured the focus of law enforcement, the courts, and the public for nearly 4 decades. His name had become a symbol of unresolved questions about crime, punishment, and accountability. Authorities had spent years piecing together the evidence, connecting seemingly isolated events, and building a case that would withstand the scrutiny of appeals and legal challenges. The facts of the case reveal not just the crimes themselves, but the painstaking work behind each arrest, each trial, and each decision made in the pursuit of justice. As we begin this documentary, remember that every detail matters. Subscribe now if you want to follow the full story without missing a moment. Those who don't might regret it when the truth comes out. Walls' story is one of law, investigation, and consequences, and the events we will explore show how a community, the courts, and investigators faced a chilling reality that lasted decades. Frank Athen Walls was born on October 12, 1967, in Ocean City, Florida. From an early age, his life was marked by instability and brushes with the law. By his late teens, Walls had begun committing minor offenses, including burglary and property crimes, which drew the attention of local authorities. These early acts were not random. Patterns in his behavior suggested a methodical approach to breaking rules and testing boundaries. Walls' day-to-day life at the time was a mix of work and aimless routines. He held temporary jobs, often leaving them abruptly, and maintained loose connections with family members. Neighbors and acquaintances later described him as quiet but unpredictable, a person whose intentions were difficult to read. Psychological evaluations during his trials noted tendencies toward impulsive decision-making, though he displayed careful planning when pursuing his crimes. This combination of routine instability and calculated action set the stage for the events that would follow. Walls' interactions with peers, his movements within the community, and his decisions in the months leading up to his convictions reveal the complex layers of his character. Understanding these details is crucial to grasping how the legal system and investigators eventually pieced together his actions. Walls' profile shows the tension between ordinary life and criminal behavior, illustrating how repeated choices, seemingly small at the time, led to serious consequences. The victims connected to Frank Athen Walls were individuals whose lives were tragically cut short, each with a story that mattered to family, friends, and their communities. These cases, spanning from the mid-1980s to 1987, were instrumental in building the investigation that would eventually identify Walls as the responsible party. Tommy Lou Whidden, one of the earliest victims, was reported missing in 1985. She was known locally for her quiet demeanor and active involvement in her neighborhood. Her disappearance prompted the first series of police inquiries that hinted at a pattern of criminal activity in the area. Cynthia Sue Condra went missing in 1986. Her case drew attention due to the circumstances of her absence and the consistency with other unresolved cases in the county. Law enforcement began to track patterns between the incidents, noting similarities in timing, locations, and the communities affected. By May 1987, Audrey Jai's case reinforced these emerging connections. Investigators were beginning to recognize a series of crimes that appeared to follow a methodical, calculated approach. Jai's case provided crucial evidence in the broader investigation, linking prior unsolved cases and helping to refine the profile of the person responsible. The timeline culminated in the events of July 22, 1987, involving Edward Alger and Ann Peterson, whose circumstances prompted immediate law enforcement action and eventually led to Walls' arrest. Each step in the timeline allowed authorities to assemble a detailed chronology, connecting disparate incidents into a coherent investigative path. Understanding the victims, their backgrounds, and the sequence of these events is essential. These profiles not only humanize the investigation but also show the diligence of law enforcement in uncovering the full scope of the criminal activity. Each case added weight to the developing profile of Walls, revealing a pattern that would be crucial in the legal proceedings that followed. In the weeks leading up to July 22, 1987, investigators later determined that Frank Athen Walls had been moving methodically within the community, testing boundaries and observing patterns in the neighborhoods he frequented. Records indicate Walls' day-to-day movements were erratic yet purposeful, combining periods of routine work with stretches of aimless activity that, in retrospect, allowed him to monitor potential targets. Law enforcement interviews revealed Walls interacted with several acquaintances during this time, asking questions about local households, neighbors' routines, and property access. These interactions, though seemingly casual at the time, were later interpreted as part of a calculated approach that authorities would use to reconstruct the timeline of events. On the day of the incident, Walls left his temporary residence and made deliberate stops at several locations in the area. Surveillance, witness accounts, and phone records helped investigators establish a timeline of his movements. Authorities noted that Walls' choices reflected careful consideration, demonstrating a mix of impulsive decisions and premeditation. Statements from witnesses and law enforcement notes describe a man acting purposefully but blending into the ordinary rhythms of the community. His presence did not immediately raise alarm, which allowed him to move without drawing attention. This sequence of actions, when examined together, illustrated a pattern of calculated planning leading directly to the incident on July 22. By analyzing Walls' movements, the police were able to anticipate connections between previous incidents and establish a sequence that would ultimately identify him as the suspect responsible for the string of crimes in the region. Each step in the timeline provided investigators with critical insight into behavior, opportunity, and decision-making. Following the events of July 22, 1987, law enforcement intensified their efforts to identify the person responsible for the crimes in the region. Investigators examined Walls' known associates, his movements leading up to that day, and evidence from prior unresolved incidents. Each connection provided critical insight into potential patterns and behaviors. On the morning of the arrest, Walls was located at a temporary residence where officers had tracked his movements through prior interviews, witness accounts, and logistical patterns. Authorities approached cautiously, ensuring that the procedure would be conducted within legal boundaries. Walls was taken into custody without incident, marking the beginning of a detailed investigative process that would uncover links to multiple prior crimes. During interviews, Walls provided statements that allowed investigators to cross-reference his actions with outstanding cases. Forensic analysis, including property records and verified witness testimonies, strengthened the connection between Walls and the string of criminal events. Investigators meticulously documented each piece of evidence, ensuring that the chain of custody remained intact and legally defensible. Police reports highlight the precision and coordination required for this stage. Detectives focused on understanding not just what occurred, but why Walls made the decisions he did and how he operated within his environment. Each verified detail contributed to the creation of a behavioral profile, which would become a crucial component of the prosecution's case. This portion of the investigation showcased law enforcement's systematic approach to solving a complex series of incidents. It also emphasized the importance of attention to detail, patience, and analytical rigor. The case would not only test investigative procedures but also set the stage for legal challenges that would unfold over decades. If you want to witness every step of how justice was methodically pursued, subscribe now, and make sure you don't miss a single moment of this in-depth investigation. Those who don't subscribe might find themselves left behind as the full story comes to light. After his arrest, Frank Athen Walls faced a series of legal proceedings that would span several years, testing both the prosecution's case and the defense's ability to challenge it. The court docket reflected multiple charges, including first-degree murder and related criminal offenses tied to the sequence of incidents in the mid-1980s. The trial began in 1988, with the prosecution presenting a detailed chronology of Walls' movements, behaviors, and connections to the victims. Witnesses included neighbors, acquaintances, and law enforcement officials who had documented Walls' actions in the weeks leading up to the events. Their testimonies highlighted consistencies that reinforced the investigators' timeline and demonstrated Walls' presence in critical locations at relevant times. Forensic experts provided objective analysis on available evidence, corroborating witness accounts without referencing graphic or sensitive details. Property records, phone logs, and verified observational reports were carefully introduced to establish patterns in Walls' behavior. The defense sought to challenge these connections, questioning the reliability of some witnesses and the interpretation of circumstantial evidence. The jury deliberated on the presented facts, weighing the consistency and credibility of each element of the prosecution's case. After careful consideration, the court delivered a verdict that would confirm Walls' accountability under the law. Sentencing followed, in accordance with Florida state statutes, determining the legal consequences and laying the groundwork for subsequent appeals. Throughout the trial, the proceedings remained highly structured, emphasizing factual evidence, methodical reasoning, and adherence to legal protocols. Observers noted the meticulous documentation and strategic planning on both sides, illustrating the complexity of high-profile criminal trials. On the morning of December 18, 2025, Frank Athen Walls began his final day under the supervision of the Florida Department of Corrections. Officials reported that he awoke at 5:10 a.m. and was provided with a last meal of chicken, steak, vegetables, baked potato, cheesecake, and juice. Walls remained compliant throughout the morning and met with a spiritual advisor, reflecting the structured protocols that guide the state's execution process. Law enforcement and corrections personnel prepared meticulously. Press members present were briefed on the rules, timelines, and procedures, ensuring that the public reporting of events adhered to legal and ethical standards. Walls' presence on death row and the scheduled execution marked the culmination of decades of investigation, trial proceedings, and appeals. The legal and procedural rigor demonstrated in Walls' case emphasizes the intersection of law, accountability, and state responsibility. Every step leading to this day, the investigation, arrests, forensic analysis, trials, and appeals illustrates the careful measures taken to ensure justice is administered according to the law. The execution was carried out using the state-approved method, in accordance with Florida statutes, and all official records confirm compliance with established protocols. Reflecting on the broader implications, the case of Frank Athen Walls underscores the importance of investigative diligence, evidence-based prosecution, and the responsibilities of the legal system. It also highlights the long-term impact of violent crime on communities and the necessity of thorough documentation and procedural integrity. Cases like this remind us of the need for vigilance in reporting and preventing crime, the value of supporting thorough investigations, and the critical role of the justice system in balancing accountability with fairness. If you want to follow these critical lessons and gain deeper insight into how justice unfolds over decades, subscribe now. Those who skip subscribing may miss out on understanding how a combination of law, procedure, and investigation brings closure to communities and holds individuals accountable.